Hello and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today, no matter what it is you're doing. For our tutorial here on YouTube today, I'd like to share a raw copper tree design using a beautiful hammered frame and some gorgeous raw copper beads to go with that beautiful soft wire. I'm going to make available a certain limited number of kits to allow you to not have to go and buy all the thousands of beads that I've just bought and let you have a go at creating this for yourself. If that's of interest to you, pop down to the video description and I'll put a link in there for you. Otherwise, let's head down to the board and take a closer look at what we're going to make together today. So I've created quite a wiggly tree with my raw copper wire, and I've added what could be fruit or leaves or just imagination tree. Don't know how you describe it, what kind of tree it is, but this is what we're going to make together. I am going to create a kit for these which will include your heavy frame wire, a little bit of extra wire to create that flat bail up at the top, finer gauge wire to add in to create those beautiful tree branches, and also all of the beads that you need. I've just bought a billion of these, not really a billion, but you know. Very easily available on the internet are copper colour base metal beads, but I wanted to have beads that would actually change colour the same way that my wire does. So if that's of interest to you, head down to the video description and take a look for the link. Otherwise, let's get cracking with our technique today. Let's pop our heart-shaped tree up at the top there. So to begin with, I'm going to work with a slightly heavier than usual wire gauge. This is 1.6mm, 14 gauge wire, and I have around about 10 inches or so. The first thing that I'm going to do is ensure that that is nice and smooth and warm. And to do that, I'm just going to run it between thumb and forefinger a good 4 or 5 times. The heavier the wire, the more you might need to work it to get it to fluid, and also the more you can actually work it without pre-hardening it and making it brittle. So I'm just going maybe about 8 times there to get a real element of heat. If you pop that on the back of your hand, you'll certainly feel that heat already. So we have got around about 10 inches, so if you come 5 inches from one end and find that centre point, I'm eyeballing it, but you should probably use a tape measure. What I'm going to do is to create a nice sharp bend down at the base. Now what you'll often find when you're using a pair of chain nose pliers, which have a rounded outside, is that one side is slightly less sharp than the other. So I've got a sharp side and a slightly softer side. In order to sharpen that up, you can pop the tips of those pliers in, just open that out and close it up just once or twice. Too much and you'll create a weak point that could shear. So that's a little bit more even. In order to get this lovely flowing heart shape, I'm going to use a large round form. This helps me make bangles. So this is just a round wooden block. You could use whatever you have available. And what I'm going to do is ensure that there's some nice warmth in that side section and press that around the outside of that heart-shaped block. And then I'm going to, sorry, it's a round block, to create a heart shape. And I'm going to just push the wire down onto that block and try and replicate where those angles occur in the wire. And then we're going to bring the wire back in on the other side. So I'm going to pop again outside that round block and just draw the wire over and across at the top. Again, I'm trying to keep these as symmetrical as possible. If you want an asymmetrical heart, that's absolutely fine too. This is going to be your design when you're finished, so you make it how you want to. Looks a bit like an alien head or a weird light bulb at the moment, so let's change that up. I'm going to open that out ever so slightly and grab my round nose pliers next. What I'm going to do is curl those into a couple of little scroll forms. So I'm just going to use the base of my round nose pliers to get that nice round form. Flip that over and do the exact same on the other side. Now I've just noticed that there's not a flush cut on this end of the wire, so I'm going to just trim the tiniest bit away. It will pay you to measure and make sure that those are of a similar size before you get going. It means that you will get that symmetry just a little bit more neatly than I'm going to. So turning those pliers around to create those scroll forms which will become the inside of that heart. Now to get this to loop over the top, this is what we're going for. We can do this in one of 2 ways. Because we've warmed the wire, what we can do is grip that form further away and just allow the wire to create that bend. As long as it's warmed evenly, it should create a nice arcing form. If that doesn't happen for you, or you're worried about doing that, you can manually curl the wire over. So start by gripping that scroll and draw it around, and then just move gently along. Don't worry about marking the wire at this stage. We are going to smash this flat in a moment anyway. So you can take much more time than I am today to get this to be symmetrical if symmetry is your aim. There's nothing wrong with an asymmetric heart. I think anatomically the human heart is relatively asymmetric anyway. So what I'm going to do is just close those scrolls up ever so slightly. I'm going to support the top of that heart and just push until the end touches. You don't have to have that closed up if you want to, but in where it's just a little bit neater. So I haven't quite closed that up, so I'm just going to draw that together slightly. And you can spend as much or as little time as you want getting this to be the kind of heart shape that you're after. I'm not overly worried because today I'm sharing a technique with you, and you can take the time to refine this to be as exact as you want. For the next segment, we're going to hammer this beautiful heart-shaped form flat, and there are a number of ways that you can do this. I'm going to be using a fairly industrial block today, so big rubber under block and a hefty steel upper block. I've had this for a very long time and it still functions perfectly. If you haven't got a giant block, you can use one of these mini Impress Art blocks, or you can even use the hammer from your Impress Art stamping kit. Just going to grab you the block and under mat that you will get in an Impress Art stamping kit. So this is perfect because it's a lovely flat hammer. You can use that for this project if you prefer. I am going to grab from over here my chasing hammer. It's one of my favourite hammers. Combined with my large steel block, this is what we're going to use to smash the next section flat. So I'm just going to adjust the camera, join me back down, and we'll get smashing. So what we want to do is to make sure that our heart is as perfect or imperfect as we want before we start smashing. You will be able to make minor adjustments later, but I quite like these two little scrolls to touch in the middle. So I'm going to make sure that I'm happy with how everything is looking before I start hammering. So it's not perfect, but you can take a second just to get that together. When you do start hammering, the wire is very likely to move under your hands. So what I'm going to do is start by pushing down those two scrolls where I want them to sit very firmly against the block. And I'm also going to support the two outer sides and begin by flattening the two upper lobes of that heart form. Couple of key things to note when hammering. Try to avoid your fingertips. That's pretty important. Also, the wire will start to move and bend dependent on how you hit it. So I haven't struck this quite as evenly as I might like. So what I'm going to do is just very gently push this back down before I get back to hammering. Another thing to mention is that you shouldn't have the wire sitting on top. So if you do this and then you smash down, you will weaken the frame and potentially destroy the whole project. It will certainly have a weaker point which could disintegrate at a later date. So what I'm going to do is continue to hammer around the frame. Feel free to fast forward through this next bit. So you may notice that there are some tool marks on my surfaces which look a little bit like diamond facets. Now I quite like that. If you're not a fan of this, you can flip the design over and very gently hammer down again. This should slightly satinize the surface of the metal. I've still got tool marks because I was very heavy-handed, but I kind of like that. If you don't, flip it over and use the satin side as your front face. As I mentioned, I kind of like the tool marking on the wire. I have smashed it really quite hard with my chasing hammer onto a massive steel block, but if you don't like that, you can be a little bit more gentle. What we're looking to do, rather than texture the metal, is we're looking to strengthen it. I've used a very heavy wire for this project anyway, but you can feel free to add texture if you prefer. Something that I might touch on in a future video for YouTube is a little bit more on texturing your wire, as well as texturing sheet. So let's move back down to the board and catch up with the next segment of our tutorial. For the next section, what we're going to do is add some wire to the frame. Now I've got a part made piece to show you what we're aiming to do in the next section, which is to build our tree and also to start adding those beads in. Now I've provided 16 of each size, so there's 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 millimeter. And with the 8 wires that we're going to turn into 16 threads, that's enough for your entire tree. Now what I want to point out is that when you're building your tree, I have allowed some sections of my tree to have a very few amount of beads. This one has just got the 2 and the 3 millimeter. This one's got the 2, 3 and 4. Some of the ones up at the top have got the full number, all 5 of them. So you might end up with a few spare beads if you want. You can use every single one if you prefer. You can just twist the tree to your desire. So let's pop that one over here. The first thing that we're going to do though is attach our wires onto the base of the frame where that point is and start building our tree. Now every time I make a tree design they come out differently. Sometimes they split into just 3. This one's split into 4 main branches with some offshoots. So there's many different ways that you can add to your design's individuality. So the wire that I have chosen to use for this next section is 0.5 millimeter gauge. If you do go for the kit, there's enough in there for 8 lots of 9 millimeter lengths. And I've cut these all ready because it's very boring to watch me measure and cut wire. So you get more than enough wire to create that and a little bit spare just to tie off at the top if you wish to. So I'm going to show you now how to add these sections onto your frame that we've just created together. So what we're going to do is to find the centre of one of those 9-inch lengths of wire. Let's just get those ones out of the way. So midpoint along that 9-inch length, we're going to lay that over the top of the frame like so. And I'm just going to pinch that maybe 3/4 of an inch from the bottom of that wire here. And I'm going to draw the tail of wire over the top all the way around the outside of that frame, up through the centre, so it's going off in the same direction, and then back around again. So it kind of goes 1.5 times really, and ends up with those 2 tails coming into the centre. I'm going to do that 4 times on one side and 4 times on the other side. I'll show you one more time and then we'll fast forward on to the next section. So again, it's the centre point of my 9-inch length of that finer wire, 0.5 millimeter. I often use a 0.4 or 26 gauge for tree designs, but because I'm carrying those beads that are a little bit more weighty and I want to be able to manoeuvre that wire later, I've opted for a slightly heavier wire. Centre point on the 0.5 or 24 gauge, take the top tail over around the outside, up the middle, back over the top, and back into the middle. You can scooch those 2 wires tightly together and then draw both tails up to the top. So I've done 2 with you now. I'm going to do another 2 on this side, and then I'm going to flip these wires out of the way and add 4 in exactly the same way on the second side. Now I'm choosing to make the satinized face of my design the forwards face for today. You can have the hammered side if you prefer. Just make your choice now. If Every tree is as unique as you are, so what is going to happen next is the creation of your very own copper tree. The reason I've chosen raw copper to work with as well instead of a less expensive wire is that it ages beautifully. So if you put this outside, it's going to gather a patina. It may go grey, it may go darker, it may even go green. The joy of having no gemstones on this one is that it is indeed safe to be outside. There's no risk of bits and bobs kind of succumbing to the elements. Copper is a beautiful metal once it has received the aging treatment. You can also, of course, apply a liver of sulphur technique to prematurely age your tree. Let's get back down to the board and take a look at where we're at now. So I'm going to start gathering my wires down at the base in little sections of 2. So if we scooch all these other wires out of the way for a moment and concentrate on our first 2 bundles. So we've got 4 wires coming into the centre in 2 small sections. And I'm just going to make sure that all those wires are nice and flat at the moment so that I can control them and show them to you as easily as possible. So I'm just going to separate that out slightly so we can see what is going on. Let's get those out of the way as well. So I've got a left wire and a right wire, and what I'm going to do is draw them so that they're quite close together, small gap between those 2 bundles, and then I'm going to pinch that gap between thumb and forefinger. I'm going to take the left bundle of wires and lift it slightly over the top, and then the right bundle of wires I'm going to scooch underneath. Now it doesn't matter if this doesn't work exactly the same for you. Let's just open that up so you can see. What I'm then going to do is to twist all of these wires together about 3 times. That's 1, that's 2, and that's 3. Now what I don't want to do is to put too much heat or work into these wires right now. What I will do is just scooch those down a bit and grab the next 2 bundles of wire. Exactly the same technique. So I'm going to make sure that they're tidy only because it's easier to show you if they're tidy, not because they need to be tidy. Now they're still quite fluid. I haven't got those so tight that they won't move. This is really helpful. If they're a little bit more firm, you can just scooch them along with a nail. So what we're going to do, exactly the same, I'll just demonstrate this one more time, is to pinch a gap between those 2 wire bundles, take the lower left one over the top, and the upper right one down underneath, and then I'm going to twist 1 and 2 and 3. Gather those carefully together without putting too much heat into them, and then just draw them slightly closer down to the base. I will simply repeat on the other side, and then I'll show you how to create that trunk of your tree. All I've done is repeated the same technique of twisting those 2 bundles of 2 wires together, and I've now got 4 lots of 4 to work with. We're going to move those down to the V shape at the bottom of that heart and start creating the main trunk of our tree. So I've drawn those little bundles of roots together down at the bottom. You can have a bit of a gap. If you want them to be neat and tidy, you can scooch them up closer together. What I've done is drawn all of those wires forward slightly. I'm just going to grab a hold of those and start twisting to create a rope-like gathering of those 16 now copper wires. So I'm quite happy with how my tree roots are sitting down at the base. You can have them symmetrical, you can have them slightly uneven, it's up to you. So I'm going to grip the base of that frame and start twisting around. The only thing we don't want to see is a single wire by itself running off amok. You can have little bunches of wire, that's absolutely fine. We're looking to create almost like a rope. Now this has gone into 2 quite definitive sections. That's absolutely fine because it helps me to twist the wire up. Now for this part only, what I'm going to do is to use my pliers very, very gently. I can't state that enough. Very carefully going to twist this bundle of wires together. Now I'm not using a huge amount of pressure to create this grip. All I'm going to do is twist that around a couple of times to tighten it up and also to shorten it slightly. This is the time that if you have a single wire just running around the outside, you can see there's one just here, just by itself. If I put too much pressure on that, I'm going to snap it, and that's rubbish. I don't want to snap it. I want to have all 16 twigs coming away at the end. So I'm going to go with my pliers onto the rope of those individual 16 wires and just try and twist that around to create a much stronger, thicker, heavier trunk. Once we've done that, we can undo a little bit of this up at the top if we want to. Now, I like trees that are interesting. You can bring those roots out further apart, you do what you want with it. But I like my trunks to be wiggly, as if they're at the seaside and they've had all that weather to deal with. So what I'm going to do is just push around the trunk a little bit to add a bit more drama, which I really like to see in my tree designs. What this has also done is brought the section of wires where they open up a little bit lower, which is exactly what I want. So you'll see that I've already got a bunch of wires coming over to the right. That is really good for me because I'm just going to very carefully splay those open. Let's have a quick count to give you an idea of how many there are. I've got 5 wires just bundling over to the right hand side. So what I'm going to do is pinch really firmly and start creating a branch that's going to come up to the right hand side. Doesn't need to be very long, we don't need to do anything else with it at this stage. If you want to very carefully take that in the middle section, you can tighten that up, but please go very gently, or just use your hands to create that next bit. I'm then going to just separate out the branches on the far side and continue to build the main trunk of the tree. So the reason I spread them out a little bit is because it gives me better purchase with thumb and forefinger to open those out. Now you might notice that there's a single wire just slightly away. Now if you want that to be snuggled in, turn underneath that wire and it will push it onto the surface of the trunk and you'll see it less. I actually quite like it because it looks like maybe some ivy is growing up onto the tree. I'm really into quite natural projects when I'm making tree designs, so whichever way you want it to go, it's absolutely up to you. You can keep it, you can kind of hide it. What I'm going to do now is maybe one more twist just here, and then I'm going to start adding a little bit more interest into the shape of my tree. I'm then going to separate this out at a third juncture. Let's have a look and see how many branches we've got coming away here. There's 5 or 6. There's 5 just there. So I've splayed them out a little bit so that they're slightly flatter. And again, that's to give me better purchase to start twisting them. In that way, you're less likely to need to use your pliers. So we're going to leave that there for a second. And then I'm going to grab what I presume to be the remaining 6 wires. Yeah, it looks like there's 6 there. Splay them out just a little bit to make sure that I can get enough purchase to start twisting to generate the next section of my tree. Now I call it my tree because it's my tree. Every single tree that I make is different. I've never made 2 the same, and that's one of the reasons I love this design and return to it time and time again. So I'm just putting a little bit of a wiggle in there, and I'm thinking about where I might want my branches to end up. So I'm just going to show you one bundle instead of all 3, because it's very boring if I do all 3. So let's choose one with an odd number. Let's go with this one up at the top. I'm going to give that a very gentle twist with my pliers in the centre of that roped up section, being very gentle. If you can do that by hand, all the better. Kind of hides what I'm trying to show you if I do it though. So what I'm going to do is separate, because I've got 5, I'm going to take 2. No, I think actually I want to have 3 going up to the top. So I'll just open those out until I get 3 that naturally sit together. I've splayed them out slightly and I'm going to make a sub branch just coming up towards the top of the tree on the left hand lobe. We'll leave that for a second. And then I've got 2 that are further down, so I'm going to just twist those around a little bit to create a branch that might go further south. Now that's not going to leave me very much space for my beads. If I just grab the demonstration piece, I will show you what I've done. Some of my branches have just got 2 beads, so this one has 2, this one has 3. This means that if you do get the kit, you'll end up with plenty of spare beads to play with. You can put them elsewhere in the design or use them in other projects. Raw copper is a beautiful product to work with. Some of them have got all 5, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beads. I'm just going to show you how to further separate out those branches and then add the beads on before we move on to the last part of the tutorial. So as I mentioned, my trees are all kind of wizened, witchy, seaside trees, and the way that I do this is just to apply a little bit of shaping with those branches. This also enables me to move. Remember I said that these 2 branches were quite short? You can take them further away from the edge by putting some interest. You do need to have a gentle hand or you will snap those wires, so just go carefully. You can also move the trunk over a bit if you want. You can take this one up further and then radiate them round. You could even have 5 coming away from 1. It's absolutely up to you how your tree looks, what kind of natural tree you think it will most be like. I'm just going to show you with this central piece up at the top how to add those beads and finish off. So if I open those other 2 out, I estimate that I could get 5 beads on here, maybe it'll be 4. If it turns out that I can only get 4 on, I'll add another bend into that branch section. So let's start applying those beads now. The reason I start with the smallest bead in the centre is when you have a collection of branches coming away, the small beads will sit side by side really nicely, whereas if you start with the large beads, they will push each other away and it won't look quite as pretty. Of course, you can do exactly what you want with yours. But let's get 5 beads onto this little branchlet or twig, whatever you call the last part of a tree. I'm definitely not an arboreologist. I don't even know what the proper word is. I do feel like Dr. McCoy sometimes, telling Captain Kirk that I am not whatever it is he has expected me to be. Damn it, Jim, I'm not a tree doctor, that kind of thing. So that fits reasonably, but what I'm going to do is show you how to attach it and also how to edit it after you've attached it. So the key point here is that I want the bead hole to be flat against the frame. It needs to sit just slightly under the surface. If I turn that sideways, you'll see we get the wire as close as we possibly can to the frame, and then what we're going to do is wrap it 3 times around the frame. So that's once. I'm going to use my pliers because it's easier for you to see. 2 and 3. We're going to flip this over the back, and what we're going to do is trim the wire just a tiny bit past where it goes over the top of that frame, straight into the scrap bin. And what we're going to do is take that teeny tiny last little bit and push it inside the frame. The reason we do that is that it means the very last bit of wire is inside, and therefore it won't be seen at the front, nor will it touch your skin at the back if you do choose to wear this as jewellery rather than a beautiful wall art project. So I'm going to tighten up those 3 wraps and give it a squish. Let's have a look at that from the front. Now, if you thought that that was a little bit too normal for you, then you can mess around with that little branch to your heart's delight. Just do so with care and attention. So you can take those little twigs and branches to absolutely wherever you desire. Let me show you another piece I had in progress earlier. So all of my trees come out differently. They all look slightly different. I do like making the slightly wizened wizards or witches trees, seaside trees, something that's seen a little bit of action. For the last part of our tutorial together, what I want to do is show you how to make a flat bail. Now, a flat bail is very frequently used in professional jewellers and it's designed to be worn on a flat chain. So you could use something like a beautiful wide ribbon, or you can just hang this up and use it as decor for your home or for your garden if you prefer. So if you're getting the kit, I have provided a 3-inch length of 1.25 or 16 gauge copper. Here's one I cut earlier, and that is to create this flat bail up at the top of your heart tree design. Now, in my demonstration piece, I've added some beads. You don't have to add beads, but in the kit I do provide you with a small selection ready to be used in the centre. So what I would say is take your 3-inch length of that 16 gauge or 1.25mm wire and just put a little bit of an arc in it at the top. If you struggle to do this with body heat and thumb, you can of course just use your ring mandrel. Don't make it too curvy because we do want to get those beads on. So I have provided 2 of those 4mm beads. So let's just see if I can actually put beads on a wire today. 2 of the 5mm beads and an extra 1 of the 6mm beads, and I think it makes a really attractive little arch over the top to create that flat bail. So let's just pop these on first, like so. Pop those beads back out of the way for now, and what I'm going to do is make sure that both of those ends are flush. They are indeed. It must have been my lucky day when I cut that bit. And I'm going to start putting scrolls on either side. Now you can have really teeny tiny scrolls on either side if you want. I'm going to see what they look like and I might cut them down. That end is not flush. It obviously wasn't my lucky day. Let's give that a quick trim, making sure that we put that sharp little bit straight away into the scrap pot for melting. And there we go. So you can measure if you wish to, and make sure that that's even on both sides. I'm just going to start scrolling that around with a fairly closed loop on the one side. Doesn't matter that it's coming off to an angle, that's just because I'm trying to do it for the camera. We can flatten that down in just a second. What I'm trying to do is get a loop going because it will stop my beads from flying off. So let's start turning that into a scroll. And what we would want is to have a slightly open scroll so that you can get that wire inside and tie it to your main project. So when you're making these coils or scrolls, it's key to just be kind to yourself and go slowly. If you need to create a closed loop first and then open that back out, like so, you absolutely can. I think mine is slightly lopsided, so you can obviously edit that if you need to. Very, very slightly lopsided. So to do that, just reverse it slightly and then take more from the other side. Once you've got those scrolls nice and even, which these are not, but we're not going to overly worry. You could spend all day doing that, and that would be very boring viewing for you. So I'm quite happy with how that's looking. What I am going to do is put just a little bit more of a bend in it. Not too much, because I don't want to stress the beads, don't want them to crack or anything. I'm quite happy with how that looks, so we're just going to hold that up to the top of that heart form, like so. And all we would do is find a gap in between wherever your branches have arrived on the frame and tie them in. When you're tying your branches in, as we did with, I think it was the other piece actually, wasn't it, up at the top? We just grab this one. When you've tied those sections on, you might want to just occasionally get your flat bail into position and see if you can leave yourself a small space, like so. So I would be reasonably happy with that. You might even want to put the little bail, the flat bail up at the top on first. And if you do want to do that, then you can just get this sighted perfectly and then add the tree branches around it either side. So I'm just going to lift that out of the way very, very gently so that I don't snap it. And I'm going to take the small excess of wire. I have allowed another couple of inches of wire for this in the kit. This again is what would essentially be a scrap length of 0.5 or 24 gauge. And I'll just show you on the one side what it looks like to get this attached on. Now for an easy life, I do most of the weaving on the scroll of the bail itself and then wrap 3 times around the flat bail and the frame. So I'm just going to post that wire through and get 3 little wraps onto that scrolled section first. Now if I get this into the light and then use my pliers, it should be slightly easier to see. I'm going to take that all the way around. It's just wrapping 3 times around that scroll section. So that is 1 wrap so far. Take the second, pass through. That's, oh, go on, in you get. In you go. If it's a bit tight, you can move that along slightly. I've kinked the end of my wire, that's why that's not happening. You could also open that scroll out a bit if you need to. Push the end through. So that's 2 passes of wire. Just going to tighten those coils up. Again, I have kinked that end section, so it's a little bit tricky. Push that all the way through. So I've got 3 wraps very, very neatly. If I flip this over onto the back, what I'm going to do is lift the wire upright and trim that so close, as close as I possibly can, so that the end actually sits inside where it's not going to hurt anyone. So once I've got my 3 little wraps on the bail section, I'm going to draw that down into position onto the frame, like so. Tricky to show, not tricky to do. I'm just going to scooch those 3 little wraps around, push the tail of the wire, the long tail of the wire, all the way around, and then I'm going to grab 3 turns around both the flat bail and the frame, 3 turns all the way around, pull the wire up the back, so I've got 3 passes of wire there. Now if they're not neat and tidy, you can undo it and give it another go, but once they are neat and tidy, very carefully give that a very gentle squish. So that looks reasonably neat. You can take more time. I'm going to flip this upside down and finish with 3 wraps around just the flat bail. Again, difficult to show, not difficult to do. So that is 1 wrap. Tighten that wrap up. Let's get a second wrap going. all the way around, and then pull that through. Helps if you tighten up the wraps, it gives you slightly more space. Bring that last little bit up over the top. Push it through by hand if you need to, and then on the back, pull that nice and neat. Trying to grab this when the camera's in the way is a bit tricky. You will be able to bring this up to your face. And then again, you will just trim that as close as you possibly can. Get that scrap into the pot so it's out of harm's way, or you're out of harm's way, and then just tidy those little coils up. Once they're nice and neat, let's flip that back over, bring everything tidily together, and give it a very gentle squish. Repeat on the other side, and then you can just sight that exactly where it needs to be. So that would sit really, really nicely just up at the top. So this is what we're going to end up with once you have done all of those. I had a couple of spare small beads, so I just wove the central section together. You don't have to do that, but you can use any of your spare beads just to hold everything together. But that is not a necessity. The project, once you've put all of your beautiful tree branches into position, I'll bring you the bit I've done now, it will be nice and sturdy. If you wanted to take a scrap section of wire and add one of your spare beads in, as I mentioned, some of these branches only use 2 or 3 beads, so you'll have a couple of spares. You could just put one in the centre at the top. And in fact, I will do that with you now. Where's that scrap bit of wire? Again, a little bit of 0.5 24 gauge. Here's a spare bead. What I'm going to do is just take a section of that wire over the top of the design. Up above the cleft of the heart, I'm going to pinch about 3/4 inch of that over the top, wind it 3 times around one side. So that's 1, that's 2, and by the time you see that third pass of wire, that will be 3. Again, I'm truncating the wire so that it ends inside the frame. And that again is for comfort in wear. Get those 3 little wraps nice and neat and tidy. You can, if you have access points, give that a bit of a squish. There is actually some mileage to doing this upper section before you add all the tree branches, because you've got slightly better access. Allow that to sit where you think the bead will fit best. Bring that bead into position. Where are you? There you go. Slide that down over the top, and then repeat with another 3 wraps on the other side. That actually looks really lovely with that slightly larger spare bead. That's one of the 5mm beads. So I'm going to pinch that into position, push the tail of the wire through. So that's 1, 2, and then that third section of wire we're going to trim just past the top. Keep that other section of wire because you never know where you might need it. Flatten that down and then take that tail so that it ends inside the frame. So let's just pop these down side by side. If you find that you have over tightened on one side and the second side simply won't sit where you want it to, magic fix is to just make that arch slightly more archy. Always bearing in mind you don't want to put too much stress on your beads. Or you can open out the coils, the spirals ever so slightly if you need to. You've got options to fix things as you go along. So we'll just add all the other beads onto this one, and with any luck it'll end up looking something like this. Well, thank you very much for being with me on the Gemhawks YouTube channel today. Again, if you want to get involved with your supported kit, I'll pop a link in the video description, and enjoy. I hope that you have a lovely day, and I'll see you again here on the Gemhawks YouTube channel very, very soon. Bye for now.